The colder the morning, the fewer people ventured down to the waterfront, and Sergeant First Class Avery Kincaid had chosen her apartment on the Halifax harbour precisely for that reason. She had a clear sightline to the water from the kitchen window. She could see anyone coming. She could count the seconds between a car door slamming and footsteps reaching the stairwell. She had mapped 3 exit routes from the building before she'd signed the lease, and she kept a go-bag packed under the bathroom sink, because old habits didn't die. They just went quiet and waited. The mornings were the hardest. Not because of the nightmares, though those came reliably enough around 3 a.m., pulling her back to a red dirt road outside of Kandahar, where the air had smelled of diesel and something worse. The mornings were hard because they were ordinary. The kettle boiled. The harbour looked grey and still. The world outside her window went about its business as though nothing had ever gone wrong anywhere, and Avery stood in her kitchen in a borrowed city, feeling like a woman watching life through bulletproof glass. She had her dog, and that was enough. Mostly, his name was Frost. He was a Belgian Malinois, 5 years old, black-muzzled and lean, with pale amber eyes that missed nothing. He had been her partner in the military working dog program for 3 years before she was medically released. And when the paperwork cleared and they handed her the leash for the last time, she'd signed the adoption papers the same afternoon. She hadn't hesitated for a second. Frost had been at her side through 2 deployments and 14 months of recovery. She was not leaving him at a kennel. He slept at the foot of her bed. He ate when she ate. When she woke up, gasping at 3 in the morning, he was already there, pressing his warm weight against her legs, grounding her before she'd even fully surfaced from whatever she'd been reliving. She didn't talk much. Neither did he. They understood each other. The problem was that she'd started to stop answering her phone. Not all at once. It had been gradual, the way most things that mattered were gradual. 1 missed call that became 2, a text left unread for a day that became a week, an inbox that filled up with messages from her sister in Dartmouth, from her former unit's peer support coordinator, from a physiotherapist whose name she kept meaning to write down. She wasn't avoiding anyone in particular. She was avoiding the effort of explaining herself, which felt like the same thing. She had been in Halifax for 7 months. She had been outside the apartment 43 times, most of those trips to the waterfront trail at dawn, when the only other people out were other dog walkers and the occasional runner who nodded and kept moving. She had been to the grocery store 11 times. She had been to a restaurant once and left before the food arrived because the noise had climbed up her spine, and she'd seen the couple at the next table both reach into their bags at the same moment, and her body had made a decision her mind hadn't caught up to yet. She was managing. That was what she told herself. She was managing, and Frost was good, and the harbour was quiet, and she didn't need anything she didn't already have. Then she got sick. It started as a scratch at the back of her throat on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it had moved into her chest. By Saturday morning, she couldn't take a full breath without something catching in her ribs, and when she stood up too fast, the room listed sideways, and she had to grab the counter to stay upright. She'd had worse. She knew she'd had worse. She told herself it was probably just a chest cold, and drank tea, and ate 2 crackers, and lay on the couch under a wool blanket, while Frost watched her from across the room with the kind of focused, unblinking attention that she would have found comforting if it hadn't also looked exactly like concern. By Sunday afternoon, she was shaking. Not from cold. The apartment was warm enough. She was shaking from inside, a deep, fine tremor that started in her chest and worked outward, and her thoughts were beginning to move in that loose, slipping way that told her something was actually wrong. She took her temperature, 39.8. She checked it again, 39.9. She sat on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub and thought about her options. She could call her sister. She could call 911. She could try to drive herself to the QE2. except she hadn't driven since the accident on Barrington Street back in October, and her car hadn't moved from the parking garage in 4 months, and she wasn't entirely sure she could make it down the stairs. Frost sat in the bathroom doorway. He was watching her with those pale amber eyes, perfectly still, the way he got when he was assessing something. She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. It was the first thing she'd said out loud in 2 days. She made it downstairs. She made it to the street, one hand on the wall, frost pressed warm and steady against her left leg. The cold air hit her, and for a moment she thought it might help. And then the world tilted again, and she caught herself on the hood of a parked car, and stood there, breathing carefully, counting the seconds the way she'd been taught to count them. A cab went by. She raised her hand. It stopped. The driver looked at her in the rearview mirror. He looked at Frost. He looked back at her. "Service dog," she said. He didn't argue. The emergency room at the Victoria General was loud and bright, and smelled of antiseptic and industrial coffee, and every surface was hard and reflective, and the fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that seemed to live directly behind Avery's eyes. She signed in at the desk and sat in the corner with her back to the wall, and Frost between her knees, and she breathed through it the way she'd breathed through worse, and she waited. She had told the triage nurse, a brisk man named Chen, who wrote very quickly and asked very few unnecessary questions, that she had the dog with her. He had looked at Frost, looked at the vest Avery had clipped onto him when she'd grabbed his gear on the way out, and written something on his clipboard and moved on without making it a discussion. She appreciated that more than she could have said. What she had not anticipated was how long the wait would be, or how loud the room would get as Sunday afternoon shifted into Sunday evening, or how completely her body would choose the waiting room plastic chair to begin genuinely giving out on her. She was listing sideways when someone said her name, not loudly, not the sharp administrative snap of a name being called from a counter. Quietly, the way someone says a name when they're not sure they have the right person and don't want to startle anyone. She looked up. A woman was crouching in front of her, not standing, crouching, getting herself below eye level, which was something you only did when you'd been trained to do it, or when you were very experienced at not frightening people. She was somewhere in her 40s, with dark eyes and close-cropped natural hair, and a hospital lanyard that identified her as a clinical nurse specialist. She had a calm face. Not the professionally smooth calm that some medical people cultivated as a kind of performance. Genuinely calm, the kind that lived in the eyes. "Sergeant Kincaid," she said again, still quiet. "I'm nurse practitioner Osi. I'm going to take you back now." Avery realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out slowly. "He comes with me," she said. Osi didn't blink. "Of course he does." She had said it the way you say something that was never in question, and something about that, the complete absence of negotiation in it, made Avery's throat tighten in a way she was not going to think about right now. The exam room was smaller than the waiting area and quieter, and nurse practitioner Josephine Osi moved around it the way Avery imagined someone moved around an active site. Efficiently, without wasted motion, announcing each thing before she did it. She was going to check the blood pressure now. She was going to listen to the lungs. She was going to take a quick look at the throat. She never touched Avery without saying so first, and she kept her movements visible, and Avery didn't know if that was training or instinct, or just who the woman was, but it made the difference between manageable and not manageable, and Avery noticed. Frost sat against the wall beside the exam table and watched Osi with the particular focused wariness he reserved for anyone who came near Avery in a context where Avery was not fully alert. He wasn't aggressive. He was assessing. He was, Avery knew, making a decision. Osi glanced at him once while she was adjusting the blood pressure cuff, and then she did something unexpected. She didn't make eye contact with him. She didn't reach toward him. She just turned her head slightly so she wasn't square on to him and said in the same quiet register she'd been using with Avery. Not to Frost exactly, but not to him either. "Good lad, I see you." Frost's ears moved, one small, precise rotation. Avery saw it happen. She'd watched Frost make his assessments for 3 years, across 2 theatres of operation and a dozen different environments, and she knew what it meant when his ears went like that. It meant something had registered as familiar. Not dangerous, known. She looked at Osi. Osi was looking at the blood pressure reading, and not at either of them, her expression professionally neutral, and Avery might have let it go except that her chest was burning, and her fever was spiking, and she was in a hospital waiting room on a Sunday night, and she had nothing left in her that was capable of small talk or indirection. "What was that?" Avery said. Osi looked up. "Your BP is low. I'm going to order some blood work." "Not that." Avery looked at Frost, then back at Osi. "You've been around working dogs." A pause. Osi set the cuff down with the particular careful motion of someone who is deciding something. "My brother was a dog handler," she said. "Canadian Forces. He did 2 rotations with the RPOU out of Borden." She said it simply, no performance in it, like she was reporting a weather fact. "That's what I said. I just said that I saw him." Frost was still watching her. His head was tilted now, just fractionally, the angle he used when he was paying the specific kind of attention that meant he'd clocked something worth filing away. Avery's chest did something complicated that had nothing to do with the infection in her lungs. "Was," she said. "Yes." Osi looked at her steadily. "He died in 2019. Helmond, his dog's name, was Brickyard." There was a silence, the kind that had weight to it. Avery didn't say she was sorry, because she was, but it wasn't the right thing yet, and she'd learned the hard way that sometimes the right thing wasn't. "I'm sorry." Sometimes the right thing was just to hold the fact of what someone had said without rushing to do anything with it. She'd had people do that for her, and she'd had people not do it, and she knew the difference in her body. O.C. seemed to know it too, because she didn't fill the silence either. She just let it be what it was. After a moment, Frost stood up. He crossed the room in 3 quiet steps, set his chin on the edge of the exam table, and looked up at O.C. Not at O.C. Avery had never seen him do that with a stranger, not once in 5 years. O.C. looked down at him, and for the first time her professional composure shifted, not broke, just shifted. The way a face does when something catches you off guard that you're not going to cry about, but you're also not going to cry about. She set her hand, very gently, on Frost's head. He leaned into it. Avery looked at the ceiling. She breathed through her nose. She was not going to do this in an emergency room. She was absolutely not going to do this. "He's never done that," she said to the ceiling. "No?" O.C. said. "Not with anyone he didn't already know." Another pause. O.C.'s voice, when she spoke again, was the same steady register she'd used since the beginning. But there was something in the undertone that hadn't been there before, something that sounded like 2 people standing on the same side of something. "He knows enough," O.C. said quietly. The blood work came back 2 hours later. Pneumonia, 1 lobe, caught early enough that it was manageable with aggressive oral antibiotics and a lot of sleep and water, but late enough that the attending physician, a young man named Dr. Farid Nasseri, who had the harried, slightly too earnest manner of someone who had been on shift for 14 hours and still cared, said very firmly that she could not go home tonight. Avery said she was going home tonight. Dr. Nasseri said her oxygen saturation suggested otherwise. Avery said she'd had worse oxygen saturation in conditions that didn't have a gift shop. They looked at each other for a moment across the exam table. O.C., who had been leaning against the counter with her arms folded, and the very specific expression of someone who has been watching this kind of conversation play out for 15 years, said, "She can have a room on the East Wing. Frost can stay. I'll square it with the charge nurse." Dr. Nasseri looked at her. O.C. looked back at him with an expression that did not invite further discussion. He noted something in the chart and excused himself. Avery looked at Osi. You didn't have to do that. The paperwork for a service animal accommodation takes about 4 minutes, Osi said. I've done it before. It's not a favor, it's a process. She handed Avery a cup of water. Drink that. Avery drank it. She was in a hospital bed by 10 o'clock. Frost was curled on the floor beside her, chin on his paws, watching the doorway. The room was quiet, quieter than she'd expected. The nurses on the East Wing moved with the deliberate softness of people who had learned that some patients needed the nights to be low stimulus, and no one came in without knocking, and the lights in the corridor were kept low. She slept. Not well, but she slept. At 2 in the morning she woke up. Not from the nightmare, for once, but from the simple ordinary fact of Frost shifting his weight and resettling, and the sound of it was so familiar and so ordinary that she lay in the dark hospital room and felt, for the first time in longer than she could precisely account for, something that was adjacent to safe. Not safe. She didn't think she was going to get there easily, or maybe ever in the way she'd been before. She wasn't naive about that. She'd done enough reading, enough staring at the ceiling at 4 in the morning with her phone screen, open to resources she kept meaning to follow up on, to know that what she was living through was not something that resolved on its own just because enough time had passed, but adjacent to safe was more than she'd had yesterday. She thought about Osi's brother, Helmond, 2019. She hadn't asked his name, and she wondered if she should have, and she filed it away as a thing she would ask in the morning if the opportunity came. She thought about Frost, setting his chin on the edge of the exam table, walking across the room to a stranger because something in the stranger had registered as known. She'd trained him. She'd worked beside him for 3 years. She knew his signals and his tells and his judgments, and she trusted them with a completeness she didn't extend to most people. And she'd watched him make a decision tonight that she hadn't made herself, and she thought about what that meant. She thought, maybe there are things that recognize each other across distances. Grief, loss, the particular texture of someone who has put a dog to bed in a forward operating base and lain awake wondering if they were going to make it home, or make it home intact, or make it home into a life that still felt like theirs. She thought, maybe Frost knew something she was still working out. She fell asleep again before she got further than that. Osi came by in the morning, not as part of a round. She knocked, stuck her head in, said she was heading off shift but wanted to check before she left. She had her coat on. She looked like someone who had been up all night and was handling it with the efficient grace of long practice. Avery was sitting up. She felt worse in the specific way that people with chest infections felt worse in the morning, deeper, more present, everything requiring more effort, but her mind was clearer than it had been in days. "How's the breathing?" Osi said. "Same, pain, present but manageable." Osi looked at Frost, who was sitting alertly beside the bed, and then back at Avery. "Are you going to call someone to come get you today? When you're discharged?" Avery opened her mouth. Osi waited. "My sister," Avery said after a moment that was longer than it needed to be. "I'll call my sister." "Okay, I usually don't." Avery stopped. Started again. "I've been not calling people. For a while I know," Osi said, not like she was judging it. Like it was a thing she recognized. "Your brother," Avery said. "Did you? After? Did you find it hard to?" She stopped again. The sentence had too many possible endings and she didn't know which one she was reaching for. Osi leaned against the doorframe. Outside in the corridor, a cart went by. Someone down the hall was laughing at something. "I called my mother," Osi said finally, "every day for about 4 months. She lives in Accra. It was very expensive." A small pause. "And then I stopped calling, and that was worse. And then I started again." She looked at Avery steadily. "There's no trick to it. You just pick up the phone, eventually, because the people you're not calling are also waiting." Avery looked at the window. The Halifax sky outside was the particular flat grey of a February morning, the kind of sky that promised nothing and delivered on that promise. She thought about her sister in Dartmouth, the unanswered texts, the calls she'd let ring through to voicemail and then listened to, once in the dark and saved without responding. "Her name is Margot," Avery said. "My sister. She's been texting me since October, and you've been reading them. All of them." O.C. nodded. "She knows you've been reading them?" Avery was quiet for a moment. I don't know if the read receipts are on. You could let her know," O.C. said, "that you read them, even if you're not ready to talk yet." Avery looked at her phone on the nightstand. Frost followed her gaze, the way he always tracked the things she looked at. "Your brother's name," Avery said. "You didn't tell me." Something moved in O.C.'s face. Not pain, exactly. Something older than pain, the thing that lives on the other side of grief after enough time has passed. "Kofi," she said. "His name was Kofi, and Brickyard," Avery said. "What happened to Brickyard?" O.C.'s expression shifted again, this time to something that was almost a smile. "He's with Kofi's wife," she said, "in Barry. He's 11 years old, and he's completely spoiled, and she sends me photos every Christmas." A pause. "He got to go home. That part worked out." Frost made a sound, not quite a whine, more like a breath with intention in it, a sound he made when something happened that he thought was worth noting. Avery looked at him. He looked back at her with those pale amber eyes, and she thought about Brickyard in Barry, 11 years old, sleeping on someone's couch, with a red bandana around his neck in the Christmas photo she was imagining. She thought about what it meant to make it home. She thought about what it meant to be the one who came back with the dog. "I'm going to give you a number," O.C. said. She was already writing on a notepad from her coat pocket, the quick, efficient script of someone who wrote things down for a living. It's a vet-to-vet peer support line. They also do in-person groups. There's one in Halifax Thursday evenings, near the Hydrostone. She tore off the sheet and set it on the nightstand under the water cup so it wouldn't move. "You don't have to call it, but if you do, tell them Josephine gave you the number. It gets you past the intro." Avery looked at the paper. "You hand these out often?" "More often than I'd like," O.C. said simply. "Less often than I should." She straightened up and buttoned the top button of her coat. "The antibiotics need to run their full course. 10 days. If the fever comes back above 39, come back in." She looked at Frost. "Take care of her." Frost's ears came forward. O.C. left. Avery sat in the bed for a while after she'd gone. The room was quiet. Frost put his chin on the edge of the mattress and breathed in the slow, measured way he had when he was settled and calm, and the harbour outside the window was grey and still, and somewhere in Dartmouth Avery's sister was going about her Sunday morning, with her read receipts, on or off, not knowing that her little sister was in a hospital room with a Belgian Malinois, and a phone number written on a notepad, and something that had loosened, overnight, in the place in her chest where the knot had lived for 7 months. She picked up her phone. She opened her messages. She found the thread with Margot. 114 messages, her sister's name at the top of each one, all of them unresponded to, most of them ending with some variation of just "let me know you're okay," or "I'm here when you're ready," or "I love you." That's all she typed. "I'm in the hospital, I'm okay. Pneumonia. Frost is here with me." I read all of them. She looked at it for a long time. She sent it. The response came in 43 seconds. 43 seconds, which meant Margot had been carrying her phone around on a Sunday morning, waiting for something she hadn't known for certain would come. And Avery thought about that, about what it cost people to wait, about the particular quiet faith that kept someone sending messages into a silence and not giving up, and she pressed her hand flat against her sternum and breathed. The message said, "I'm getting in the car right now. Don't you dare tell me not to come." Avery looked at Frost. He was watching her with his head tilted, those pale amber eyes steady and unhurried. She typed back, "I won't." She put the phone down on the blanket. Outside, the grey harbour moved. Frost's tail just once swept the hospital floor. She had not noticed until that moment that it was the first time she'd seen him wag since the autumn. She sat with that for a while, the weight of it, the ordinary, extraordinary fact of a dog's tail moving in a grey February morning in a hospital room in Halifax, and she thought about Kofi Ose and his dog Brickyard, and a woman in Barrie sending Christmas photos across the distance, and she thought about all the ways that things survived, unattacked, not unaltered, not the same as they'd been before, but present, continuous, still here. She thought, one call, one text, one word that a stranger spoke in a quiet voice, that a dog recognized before she did. She thought, maybe that's how it starts, not with a plan or a program or a decision you make in the abstract, with something small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, a piece of paper under a water cup, a read receipt, a tail moving once across a floor. Avery Kincaid sat in her hospital bed and waited for her sister to come, and for the first time in 7 months, she didn't map the exits.